What do you do when your family calls you a failure at dinner, not knowing they're sitting in the restaurant you built? Tonight, my sister's engagement celebration became the moment 5 years of silence finally shattered. And trust me, the look on their faces when they found out who really owned this place absolutely priceless. Standing outside Harbor Restaurant, my hands are trembling. Not from the October chill cutting through Manhattan, but from what's waiting inside. Tonight, my family thinks they're having dinner at some random upscale place my sister Grace picked for her engagement celebration. They have no idea they're about to eat at my restaurant, the one I built from nothing while they wrote me off as their biggest disappointments are 5 years. That's how long it's been since my parents looked me in the eye without that familiar mix of pity and frustration. 5 years since my brother Mark stopped asking when I'd get serious about my life. 5 years since Grace told me I was embarrassing the family name by chasing pipe dreams in Brooklyn kitchens. The irony is delicious. Tonight they'll sit at table 12, the same spot where I signed the lease papers 3 years ago. They'll order from a menu I created, drink wine I selected, and complain about portion sizes while sitting in a dining room that James Beard called revolutionary. They still think I'm the family failure who dropped out of Columbia to play with the food. But here's what they don't know. The girl they labeled as directionless, the daughter who supposedly wasted her Ivy League education, just got reviewed by the Times last month. 3 stars, the youngest female chef owner in Manhattan to achieve that rating. I take a deep breath, smooth my black dress, and push open the door. My sommelier, Ethan, nods at me from behind the bar. He knows what tonight means. My entire kitchen staff knows. Even the hostess is in on it. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't a dish served cold. Sometimes it's a perfectly executed tasting menu that costs more than their mortgage payment. And they're about to find out that the daughter they gave up on didn't just survive without them. She thrived. Growing up, Carter meant growing up with expectations carved in marble. Upper East Side penthouse private schools, summer houses in the Hamptons. My father, Robert, built his investment firm from nothing, and my mother, Margaret, made sure everyone knew we'd earned our place among Manhattan's elite. But even as a kid, I was different. While my siblings, Mark and Grace, collected achievements like trophies, I collected recipes. While they practiced violin and debate team, I snuck into the kitchen to watch our housekeeper, Maria, make her grandmother's tamales. Ivy's going through a phase, Mom would tell her friends when they found me at age 12 teaching myself to make perfect pasta from scratch. She'll grow out of it. But I never did. Every family dinner became a battlefield, disguised as fine dining. Grace would talk about her pre-law internships, Mark about his economics honors, and I'd try to share my excitement about a soufflé I'd finally mastered. The silence that followed was always deafening. Cooking is a lovely hobby, sweetheart, Dad would say in that patient tone reserved for children who didn't understand the real world. But it's not a career for someone with your opportunities. The worst part wasn't the dismissal. It was the way they'd exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Concerned parent looks that said, "What are we going to do with her?" Everything changed when I met Lena Rodriguez in 9th grade. Her mother owned a small flower shop in the village, and Lena had been arranging bouquets since she could hold scissors. While my parents saw her family's business as quaint, I saw something beautiful. People building something with their hands, creating joy for others, making a living from their passion. "Your risotto is better than anything at Le Bernardin," Lena told me one afternoon in her family's tiny apartment above the flower shop. I'd brought lunch to share something I'd been perfecting for weeks. "My parents think cooking is beneath me," I said, twirling pasta around my fork. "Your parents think a lot of things," she replied with that directness that made me love her friendship. "Doesn't mean they're right about everything." That conversation planted a seed that would grow into rebellion. Lena saw my cooking the way I felt about it, like it mattered. Like I mattered when I was creating something beautiful and delicious with my own hands. But at home, the pressure intensified. Junior year brought college prep meetings where my parents mapped out my future, like a military campaign. Ivy League school's business or pre-law track summer internships at Dad's firm. My dreams weren't consulted, just systematically replaced with their version of success. We're not asking you to give up cooking, Mom said during one particularly tense dinner. We're asking you to be realistic about your future. You can always cook for your family someday. Cook for my family. Like my passion was just an extension of domestic duty, something to fill time between real accomplishments. That's when I started planning my secret life. If they wouldn't take my dreams seriously, I'd prove them wrong in ways they'd never see coming. I just had to be patient enough to play their game while building my own. Columbia University, 2015. Finance major by day, rebel by night. That's how I survived 4 years of my parents' dream while nurturing my own. Every morning, I'd sit in corporate finance lectures, taking notes about market volatility and capital structures. My classmates saw a dedicated student heading for Wall Street. What they didn't see was the girl who spent her nights running underground supper clubs in dorm common rooms and off-campus apartments. Lena became my secret weapon. While other students were cramming for midterms, we were planning 5-course dinners for 20 hungry souls who'd heard whispers about the girl who could turn a hot plate and borrowed serving dishes into something magical. She'd arrive with mason jars filled with wildflowers she'd gathered from Central Park, transforming cramped spaces into intimate dining rooms. Your risotto tells stories my grandmother's never could. A senior philosophy major told me one night, tears in her eyes after my butternut squash creation. That's when I knew. This wasn't just rebellion against my parents. This was my calling, but I had to be careful. One economics professor lived in the same building where I hosted my Thursday night dinners. I'd schedule them for his teaching nights, timing everything perfectly. The smell of searing protein and caramelized onions would drift through the hallways just as he returned home, but by then, we'd vanished without a trace. The money helped too. $25 per person cash only. I'd save every penny in a coffee tin under my bed, telling my parents the money came from tutoring classmates. They were so proud their daughter was being fiscally responsible. They had no idea I was building my escape fund one perfectly plated dish at a time. Spring semester junior year changed everything. Lena convinced me to cater a small fundraiser for her environmental science club. Just appetizers for 40 people, she said. Nothing fancy, but one of those 40 people was Chef Émile Dubois. I'd been following his career since high school. 3 Michelin stars, James Beard winner, the guy who'd revolutionized French cuisine in America. And there he was, standing in a cramped community center basement, holding my bacon-wrapped scallop with pomegranate reduction. He took one bite, then another. Then he found me in the makeshift kitchen floor, still dusting my shirt. "Who taught you to balance acid like that?" he asked in his soft French accent. "YouTube," I answered honestly, immediately regretting it. He laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine delight. "YouTube doesn't teach intuition. That comes from somewhere deeper. What's your name?" When I told him I was a finance major, his expression shifted. "Mon Dieu, what a waste. You have a gift that can't be taught in business school." He handed me his card. Real heavy cardstock with embossed lettering. "I'm opening a new location next year. Call me when you're ready to stop pretending to be someone you're not." That card sat in my wallet for 6 months, burning a hole through my carefully constructed facade. Every derivatives class, every corporate law lecture, I'd feel it there, whispering possibilities I wasn't brave enough to voice. Until the night my parents announced their expectations for my post-graduation plans. Goldman Sachs internship already arranged through Dad's connections. A starter position at his investment firm waiting for me. My entire future mapped out in quarterly projections and annual bonuses. That's when I finally understood what Lena had been trying to tell me all along. Some dreams are worth the risk of disappointing people who never really knew you anyway. The call to Chef Émile happened at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. I'd been staring at my acceptance letter to Goldman Sachs for 3 hours, and something inside me finally snapped. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said, like he'd been expecting me for months. "Can you be at Le Bernardin tomorrow at 6 a.m.? 6 hours later, I was standing in one of the most prestigious kitchens in New York, watching masters at work. The precision was intoxicating. Every movement deliberate, every flavor calculated, every plate a work of art that would disappear in minutes. See that station? Emil pointed to a corner prep area. That's where you'll start if you're serious. 12-hour days minimum wage, and I'll work you harder than your finance professors ever did. But you'll learn what it means to create something that matters. The weight of the decision hit me like a freight train. Everything my parents had sacrificed for every expectation they'd built around my future. Every family dinner where they bragged about their daughter, the future investment banker. All of it would crumble the moment I said yes. I need to think about it, I whispered. No, Emil replied firmly. You need to feel about it. Your mind has been making decisions for 4 years. What does your heart say? Standing there, surrounded by the symphony of sizzling pans and rapid-fire French I knew. This was home in a way Colombia's marble halls never were. This was where I belonged. That night, I called a family meeting. Mom made her famous lasagna, thinking we were celebrating my job offer. Dad opened a bottle of champagne he'd been saving. Grace brought flowers. Even Mark drove in from Connecticut with his wife and kids. They were all smiling when I walked into our Park Avenue dining room. The same room where I'd announced my acceptance to Columbia 5 years earlier. The same table where they'd toasted my high school valedictorian speech. The room that held every major milestone of the daughter they thought they knew. So, the Goldman Sachs position, Dad began raising his glass. I knew you'd make us proud, sweetheart. I'm not taking it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mom's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Mark's champagne glass froze at his lips. What do you mean, not taking it? Grace asked, her voice already sharp with concern. I'm withdrawing from Columbia. I'm going to culinary school. The silence that followed was deafening. Not the contemplative quiet of consideration, but the vacuum of shock. The kind of silence that precedes an explosion. Dad set down his glass so carefully I thought it might shatter from the tension. Ivy, this isn't funny. I'm not joking. I've been accepted to the Culinary Institute and I start next month. Over my dead body, Mom said, her voice barely controlled. Do you have any idea what we've invested in your education? What we've sacrificed? I know exactly what you've invested, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. You've invested in a version of me that doesn't exist. You've sacrificed for a dream that was never mine. Mark leaned forward, his investment banker persona in full force. Ivy, let's be rational here. You're talking about throwing away a 6-figure starting salary to work in kitchens for minimum wage. That's not a career, that's a hobby. This isn't a phase, I said, looking directly at each of them. This is who I am. This is who I've always been. You just never bothered to see it. Dad's face was turning red the way it did when his golf game went badly. We will not support this foolishness. If you walk away from everything we've built for you, you walk away from this family. The ultimatum hit like a physical blow, but in that moment, something shifted inside me. The little girl who'd always sought their approval died quietly in that dining room. What emerged was someone I'd never been brave enough to be. Then, I guess this is goodbye, I said, standing up from the table. I walked upstairs, packed 2 suitcases with everything that mattered, and left through the front door I'd entered through 1,000 times as their daughter. The last thing I heard was my mother crying and Grace calling my name. But I didn't look back, because for the first time in 22 years, I was walking towards something that was entirely mine. Brooklyn, 2016, a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Williamsburg that I shared with 3 other struggling 20-somethings. My bed was a mattress on the floor in what used to be a walk-in closet. The bathroom door didn't close properly, and the refrigerator made sounds like a dying animal. It was perfect. For the first time in my life, nobody was telling me who I should be. The Culinary Institute was brutal in ways Columbia never was. 12-hour days on your feet, burns that never quite healed, and instructors who would break you down to your essential elements just to see if you had what it took to rebuild yourself. I loved every second of it, but the money situation was desperate. My savings from those college supper clubs lasted exactly 6 weeks. My parents had cut me off completely just like they promised. Dad even blocked my number after I called to tell them I'd made Dean's List at culinary school. Mom returned my birthday card unopened. I worked 3 jobs to survive. Prep cook at a diner in Queens from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., classes from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., then dishwasher at an Italian place in the village until 2 a.m. 4 hours of sleep, if I was lucky, instant ramen for most meals and laundry at the laundromat, because our building's machines had been broken for 6 months. My roommates thought I was insane. Jessica was a struggling actress who at least got callbacks. Marcus was a freelance graphic designer who occasionally landed decent clients. Sarah taught yoga and made more in a weekend workshop than I made in a month. They'd find me passed out over textbooks at the kitchen table, studying flavor profiles and knife techniques while they talked about Netflix shows I'd never had time to watch. "Why don't you just call your parents?" Jessica asked one night, finding me eating peanut butter straight from the jar, because I was too exhausted to make actual food. "I mean, they'll forgive you eventually, right?" I almost laughed. She had no idea what Carter family pride looked like. My parents would rather pretend they only had 2 children than admit they'd been wrong about their youngest. The low point came during my second semester. I'd been fighting a fever for 3 days working through it because I couldn't afford to miss shifts. During practical exams, I collapsed right into my consommé, spent 2 days in the ER with pneumonia, and the bills wiped out what little I'd managed to save. That's when Lena showed up at my apartment with groceries and a fierce expression I'd never seen before. "This ends now," she said, unpacking organic vegetables I definitely couldn't afford. "You're killing yourself trying to prove a point." "I'm not proving a point," I said weakly from my mattress fort. "I'm surviving." "No, you're drowning with pride, and that's exactly what they expect you to do." She was right, and I hated her for it. Some part of me was waiting for them to rescue me, to show up and say they'd been wrong. But the Carters didn't admit mistakes. They just pretended they'd never happened. The turning point came during my externship at Emil's newest restaurant. He'd been watching me work for weeks, this ghost of a girl who showed up early, stayed late, and never complained even when she was clearly running on fumes. "Ivy," he said one night after service, "great chefs don't martyr themselves. They learn to be strategic about their sacrifices." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation for a line cook position at Gramercy Tavern, one of the most respected kitchens in the city. "They're looking for someone who understands that cooking isn't just about technique," he said. "It's about heart. You have more heart than any cook I've trained, but heart without sustainability is just a recipe for burnout." The job at Gramercy changed everything. Better pay, incredible mentorship, and most importantly, a kitchen full of people who understood that food was more than just business. It was art, comfort, memory, and hope all plated together. For the first time since leaving Columbia, I could breathe. I moved to a better apartment this time with just one roommate. I could afford groceries that didn't come from the discount bin. I could focus on learning instead of just surviving. But the best part was the confidence that started growing in my chest. Not the desperate need to prove my parents wrong, but the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. Every perfect sauce, every successful service, every compliment from a guest built another layer of the person I was becoming. The girl who'd left Park Avenue was disappearing, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who didn't need permission to dream big. Gramercy Tavern, 2017. The kitchen where dreams either came true or died spectacular deaths. I chose the first option. 18 months of the hardest work I'd ever done. I wasn't just learning to cook at this level. I was learning to think like a chef. Every service was a masterclass in precision timing and grace under pressure that made my Columbia finals look like kindergarten. Chef Michael noticed me during my 3rd week when I stayed 2 hours after my shift to perfect a sauce that hadn't quite hit the mark during dinner service. I wasn't getting paid for those extra hours, but something inside me needed to get it right. "Carter," he called out as I was finally packing up. "That sauce. What were you thinking?" I could have lied, said it was fine, moved on. Instead, I told him the truth. It was missing something. a brightness that would cut through the richness without competing with the protein. I think it needs acid, but not lemon. Maybe champagne vinegar, just a whisper. He made me demonstrate. I adjusted the sauce, tasted, adjusted again. When I handed him the spoon, he was quiet for a long moment. Tomorrow, you're moving to the sauce station. That promotion changed my trajectory completely. Sauce is the soul of fine dining, the element that transforms good ingredients into unforgettable experiences. It's where technique meets intuition, where you learn to taste not just what is, but what could be. Emil started visiting more frequently, checking on my progress. He'd taste my work without comment, just a slight nod that meant everything to someone starving for validation from a master. Then one night, he pulled me aside after service. I'm hosting a private dinner next month. 20 guests, 7 courses. I want you to create the fish course. My hands were shaking when I went home that night. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was a test. The guest list would include food critics, investors, and established chefs, people who could make or break careers with a single bite. I spent 2 weeks developing the dish. Pan-seared halibut with brown butter and sage, but elevated with techniques I'd been perfecting for months. A delicate cauliflower puree infused with white truffle oil. Crispy pancetta that I rendered myself, cutting it so thin it melted on the tongue. And a sauce that took me 47 attempts to perfect, a brown butter emulsion with micro herbs and a hint of preserved lemon that brightened everything without overwhelming the fish. The night of the dinner, I was terrified. These weren't regular diners who'd be polite about mediocre food. These were people who ate at the best restaurants in the world, as a matter of course. My dish would be compared to every great fish course they'd ever experienced. I plated 20 portions with the precision of a surgeon, each element placed exactly where it needed to be for maximum impact. The servers carried them out like they were delivering priceless art, which in a way they were. 20 minutes later, Emil returned to the kitchen with news that changed my life. "Sophia Chen wants to meet you," he said simply. Sophia Chen. I knew the name from food and wine articles and industry gossip. Former Goldman Sachs executive turned restaurant investor, the woman behind some of the most successful culinary ventures in the city. She'd left finance to fund restaurants the way others funded tech startups, with an eye for potential that bordered on supernatural. She was waiting in the private dining room, elegant and sharp-eyed, still holding her fork. "Ivy Carter," she said, standing to shake my hand. "That fish course was extraordinary. Tell me, what are your plans after Gramercy?" I hadn't really thought about after. I was so focused on surviving the present that the future felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. But standing there, facing a woman who'd turned passion into empire, something crystallized in my mind. "I want to open my own restaurant," I heard myself saying. "Something that feels like home but elevated. Comfort with sophistication. Food that tells stories." She smiled. "Show me your business plan." "I don't have one." "Then write one. You have 3 weeks." Those 3 weeks were a blur of research, number crunching, and vision boarding that made culinary school look relaxing. I created a concept that felt authentic to who I'd become. Harbor, named for the idea of a safe place where travelers could find exceptional food and genuine hospitality. Not stuffy, not pretentious, but undeniably excellent. When I presented to Sophia, I wasn't just pitching a restaurant. I was sharing my story. The girl who'd been told her dreams were worthless, who'd built something beautiful from nothing, who understood that great food was about more than just technique. "I'm in," she said before I'd finished talking. "But I have conditions. You'll be head chef and owner, but I want oversight on major decisions for the first 3 years. And Ivy, this isn't charity. I expect a return on my investment. You'll succeed because you're exceptional, not because I feel sorry for your story." 8 months later, I signed the lease on a beautiful space in the West Village. 3 months after that, Harbor opened to its first guests. The Review and Eater called it a love letter to modern American cuisine, written by a chef who understands that the best meals feed both body and soul. But the moment that mattered most, Happened 6 months after opening when a young woman approached me after service. She was crying but smiling. "I brought my parents here tonight," she said. "They've never understood my decision to leave law school for art, but after eating your food, seeing what you built, they finally get it. They finally see that following your passion isn't selfish. It's brave." That's when I knew Harbor wasn't just my restaurant. It was proof that dreams deferred aren't dreams denied. Sometimes they're just dreams that needed time to grow into something worthy of the risk. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in September, 3 years after Harbor opened. Thick cream cardstock with elegant script that screamed Upper East Side sophistication. "Grace Carter and James Wellington request your presence at their engagement celebration dinner." The address made my breath catch. Harbor. They'd chosen my restaurant without knowing it was mine. I stared at that invitation for an hour, holding my coffee until it went cold. 5 years of silence, and this was how they reached out. Not an apology, not even a phone call, just an expectation that I'd show up and play the role of grateful little sister, thankful to be included again. Lena found me still sitting there when she came to deliver flowers for the evening service. "That's either very good news or very bad news," she said, reading my expression. "Grace is getting engaged. They want me at the dinner. Here, at Harbor." She started laughing but stopped when she saw my face. Oh my God, they don't know. They have no idea. The irony was perfect and terrible. My sister, who'd always chosen the finest restaurants for family celebrations, had unknowingly selected the place I'd built from nothing. The same sister who'd told me I was embarrassing the family name was about to celebrate her engagement in my dining room. I had two choices: ignore the invitation and maintain the peace I'd built, or show up and face 5 years of accumulated hurt and anger. The old Ivy would have thrown the invitation away, but the woman I'd become, the one who'd survived culinary school and built a successful restaurant, she was curious about something else entirely. I wanted to see who they were now, whether success had taught them anything about the daughter they'd discarded. The night of the dinner, I arrived early and checked every detail personally. Table 12, the round corner table with the best view of both the kitchen and the dining room. Fresh orchids from Lena Harbor's signature cocktails pre-selected, and a menu that represented 3 years of perfecting my craft. My parents arrived first, and the sight of them hit me like a physical blow. Dad's hair was grayer. Mom looked smaller somehow. But they moved through my restaurant with the same entitled confidence they'd always carried, critiquing the decor and questioning the hostess about wait times. "The tables seem rather close together," Mom said, her voice carrying that particular Carter tone that suggested the management should be grateful for her feedback. Grace and her fiancé James arrived 20 minutes late, as if making an entrance. She looked exactly the same, blonde and polished, and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having to doubt your place in the world. James was handsome in that generic Wall Street way, the kind of man my parents had always hoped I'd marry. Mark came with his wife Jennifer, looking every inch the successful hedge fund manager he'd become. They air-kissed Grace and made the obligatory comments about the charming restaurant she'd chosen. I watched all of this from the kitchen window, my heart hammering against my ribs. They looked like strangers wearing familiar faces, people I'd once known intimately, but who'd become foreign to me over 5 years of silence. When they were seated, I could hear fragments of their conversation through the service window. The usual Carter topics: property values in the Hamptons, Mark's latest acquisition, Grace's wedding planning stress, and James's promotion at his law firm. Not once did anyone mention the empty chair at their table. Not once did anyone wonder aloud where their youngest daughter might be, or whether she was happy or even alive. "They look good," Ethan said quietly, appearing beside me with wine glasses for their table. "They look the same," I corrected. "Exactly the same." The dinner service was flawless from a technical standpoint, but watching my family eat my food without knowing it was mine created a surreal kind of torture. They complained about everything, of course. The portions were too small, the flavors too complicated, the prices too high. "I don't understand these tiny portions," Dad grumbled over my signature short rib, a dish that had been featured in Food and Wine. For what we're paying, I expect to leave full. Grace picked at her duck breast like it was personally offensive to her. Everything's so rich. Don't they have anything simple? I asked for the dressing on the side and it's still too heavy. Mark kept checking his phone and sighing dramatically. We could have gone to Daniel for this price. At least there you know what you're getting. Mom was the worst. She dissected every element of every dish, comparing it unfavorably to restaurants they'd been to in Europe, making comments about how young chefs today didn't understand classical technique. But James, surprisingly, was different. He ate thoughtfully, appreciating the complexity of flavors, even complimenting the wine pairings Ethan had selected. When Grace complained about her duck, he switched plates with her and savored every bite. "This is actually exceptional," he told the server. "Please give our compliments to the chef." That compliment from my sister's fiancé who'd never met me meant more than any review or award ever could. The breaking point came during dessert. My pastry chef had created a deconstructed apple tart with brown butter ice cream and candied walnuts, a playful take on classic American flavors. Grace took one bite and pushed it away. "This is exactly what's wrong with restaurants today," she announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "They take something simple that works and ruin it with unnecessary complications. Sometimes traditional is better." "It's actually quite good," James said mildly, but Grace was on a roll. "I mean, who runs this place? Some culinary school graduate who thinks they're reinventing food? It's pretentious nonsense." That's when something inside me snapped. Not anger exactly, but a clarity so sharp it cut through 5 years of doubt and hurt. These people, my family, were sitting in my restaurant eating food I'd created with my own hands, dismissing my life's work as pretentious nonsense, while complaining about prices they could easily afford. And they had no idea that the daughter they'd disowned was responsible for every single thing they were experiencing. The irony was no longer just perfect. It was about to become revelatory. I took a deep breath and walked out of the kitchen. The dining room felt different from this side, larger, somehow full of possibilities instead of memories. I moved through the space I'd designed, past tables, filled with guests enjoying food I'd created, toward the people who'd shaped me in ways they'd never understand. They didn't see me coming at first. Grace was still holding court about the failings of modern cuisine, while James ate his dessert in thoughtful silence. Mom was checking her phone, probably coordinating with the wedding planner. Dad was calculating the tip on his phone calculator the way he always did. Mark noticed me first. His expression shifted from casual dining mode to confused recognition, like seeing a ghost in an expensive restaurant. "Ivy," he said, and the entire table went silent. Grace's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Mom's phone clattered onto the table. Dad looked up from his calculations with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Oh, hello, everyone," I said calmly. "I hope you've enjoyed your dinner." The silence stretched like a held breath. 5 years of estrangement compressed into a single moment of recognition. "What are you doing here?" Grace asked, recovering first. "Are you working here?" Before I could answer, Ethan appeared beside me with perfect timing, carrying a bottle of our finest champagne. "Welcome back, Founder Carter," he said with just the right amount of professional warmth. "Shall I open this at your table? Or would you prefer to celebrate the engagement in the private dining room, Founder Carter?" The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Dad's calculator slipped from his hands. "Founder." I looked at each of them, these people who'd raised me and rejected me, who'd shaped my deepest fears and strongest motivations. Harbor is my restaurant. I'm the chef and owner. Grace's face went through a spectacular range of emotions. Shock, disbelief, something that might have been embarrassment, and finally, a kind of desperate calculation. "Your restaurant," Mom whispered. "The pretentious young chef you've been criticizing all evening. That's me." I pulled out the empty chair and sat down at their table like I belonged there. Because I did. Not as their daughter seeking approval, but as the successful businesswoman I'd become. "But how?" Mark asked, his hedge fund brain automatically jumping to logistics. The capital requirements alone for a place like this. Investment partnership, 3 years of planning, 18 months of construction, and we've been profitable since the month 6. I kept my voice conversational, like we were discussing the weather. We just got our 3rd star from the Times last month. James was the only one who looked genuinely pleased. Congratulations. This is really impressive, Ivy. Thank you, James. I appreciate that. Dad found his voice, though it came out smaller than usual. Why didn't you tell us? The question was so absurd, I almost laughed. When exactly would I have told you? You blocked my number. Remember, returned my letters unopened. Made it very clear that I was no longer part of this family. We thought? Grace started, then stopped. You thought what? That I'd come crawling back when I failed. That I'd apologize for choosing my own life over your expectations. We thought you'd change your mind, Mom said quietly. That you'd realize we were right. You were right about some things, I admitted. The restaurant business is brutal. The hours are insane. The failure rate is astronomical. But you were wrong about the thing that mattered most. What's that? Dad asked. You were wrong about me. The admission hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure they'd cross. Grace was looking around the restaurant with new eyes, taking in the packed tables, the elegant design, the obvious success of what I'd built. All this time you've been here, in the city, and we never knew. I've been building a life, I corrected. The life you told me was impossible. Mark leaned forward, his business instincts kicking in. What's your annual revenue, your profit margins? Who are your investors? Mark. The sharpness in my voice stopped him cold. I didn't come to this table to justify my choices or prove my worth through numbers. I came because you're my family, and despite everything, I wanted to see if 5 years had changed anything. And has it? Mom asked. I studied her face, looking for some sign of the mother who taught me to make Sunday pancakes, who'd bandaged my scraped knees, who'd cried when I left for college. She was still there under the layers of hurt and pride and stubborn Carter expectations. Some things have changed, I said carefully. I'm not the girl who left your dining room 5 years ago. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need your financial support, or your social connections, or your validation. I built this without you. Dad winced like I'd slapped him. But, I continued, I realized something tonight watching you eat my food sitting in my restaurant. I don't want to punish you anymore. I don't want to carry this anger. It's exhausting and it's not who I want to be. So what do you want? Grace asked. I want to set some boundaries. If you want me in your life, if you want to be part of mine, it happens on equal terms. No more condescension. No more treating my choices like character flaws. No more expecting me to apologize for becoming exactly who I was meant to be. The table fell quiet again. I could see them processing, calculating, trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality where their dismissed daughter held all the cards. Finally, Dad spoke. I'm proud of you, Ivy. I should have said it 5 years ago, and I should have said it sooner tonight. What you've accomplished here, it's extraordinary. Mom nodded, tears starting in her eyes. I was so scared you'd fail. I thought we were protecting you from disappointment. But you were protecting yourselves, I said gently, from the possibility that I might succeed in a way you didn't understand. Grace reached across the table and touched my hand. I owe you an apology. More than one, actually. Starting with everything I said about this restaurant tonight. The food really is exceptional, James added. I'd love to bring clients here. You're welcome anytime, I said. All of you are. But as guests, not as family members, doing me a favor by showing up. We talked for another hour, carefully navigating years of hurt and misunderstanding. It wasn't perfect reconciliation. It wasn't movie magic healing, but it was a beginning. A tentative bridge built on mutual respect instead of familial obligation. When they finally left, Dad hugged me for the first time in 5 years. Mom whispered another apology. Grace promised to call, and for the first time, I believed she might actually do it. But the moment that mattered most came from an unexpected source. As James shook my hand goodbye, he said, "Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Grace is lucky to have you as a sister." After they left, I stood in my empty restaurant, surrounded by the life I'd built from nothing. Lena appeared with a glass of wine and a knowing smile. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I said, and meant it. Finally, completely free. The girl who'd left Park Avenue 5 years ago had been running from something. The woman standing in Harbor tonight had been running towards something, and she'd finally arrived. Tomorrow, I'd start working on my cookbook. Next month, I'd break ground on Harbor's second location. Next year, who knew? The possibilities felt endless, but tonight I was exactly where I belonged. Home. If you've ever felt like the black sheep of your family, like your dreams were too big or too different, I want you to know something. Your dreams are valid. Your path is yours to choose. And sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. Sometimes it's proving yourself right. What family expectations have you had to overcome to become who you're meant to be? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you found your way home to yourself.